Before the flood, before the giants, before the world was washed clean, there were angels who were never meant to fall. They were not rebels at first. They were not demons. They were watchers. Long before Noah built the ark, long before rain had ever touched the earth, a heaven appointed certain angels with a single task to observe humanity. They were called the Watchers. Their role was simple yet sacred: to watch over the world from a distance, to guard the order of creation, and to report what they saw to the heavens above. They were not rulers. They were not kings. They were not meant to interfere. And for a time they obeyed. According to ancient writings attributed to Enoch, the seventh generation from Adam, these watchers descended close enough to see humanity clearly, but not close enough to become part of it. They observed mankind's growth, its cities, its families, its struggles. They watched humans learn to plant, to build, to speak, to dream. And as the generations passed, something unexpected happened. The watchers began to feel they were eternal beings, untouched by death. Humanity was fragile, fleeting, painfully alive. The contrast fascinated them. Humans loved deeply because their time was short. They feared because their lives were uncertain. They desired because everything could be lost. The Watchers were not created to feel desire, but desire found them anyway. The Book of Enoch tells us that as humanity multiplied, the Watchers began to look upon the daughters of men, and something changed inside them. What began as observation turned into longing. What was meant to be duty slowly became temptation. And temptation, once entertained, does not remain harmless for long. This was not a sudden rebellion. It was gradual, quiet, almost unnoticed. There was no war in heaven, no lightning from the sky, just a slow erosion of obedience, one thought at a time. What if we could experience life as they do? What if we could walk among them? What if we were meant for more than watching? These questions were never meant to be asked, but they were. The Watchers began to gather among themselves, speaking in whispers away from the gaze of heaven. Some resisted, some hesitated. They knew the boundaries that had been set. They knew the consequences of crossing them. But knowledge does not always prevent disobedience. Sometimes it only delays it. Eventually, a leader emerged. His name was Simjaza. He feared what they were becoming, yet he feared something else, even more, that some would fall alone bearing judgment while others remained pure. And so he proposed a pact, a vow. If they were to descend fully into rebellion, they would do so together. No one would turn back. No one would stand innocent. According to Enoch, 200 Watchers agreed. 200 angels made a decision that would change the course of human history forever. They chose not to watch anymore. They chose to descend. This was not simply an act of lust. It was a rejection of their role in creation, a crossing of a line that separated heaven and earth. When the Watchers stepped beyond their appointed place, they disrupted an order that had been carefully woven since the beginning, and heaven noticed. But judgment did not come immediately. Instead, the world continued unaware of what was unfolding above and around it. Humans went on, living their lives, never realizing that something ancient and dangerous had just begun. The balance between heaven and earth had been disturbed, and the consequences would soon manifest in ways no one could control. The Watchers believed they were choosing freedom, but they were walking toward chains. They believed they were gaining knowledge, but they were unleashing corruption, and they believed heaven would remain silent. They were wrong, because what followed was not just a fall, it was the beginning of a corruption so severe that it would lead to one of the greatest judgments the world has ever known. A judgment not only against mankind, but against something darker that had taken root beneath the surface of creation itself. And this is where the story truly begins. Before the Watchers ever looked upon humanity with longing, they were given a mission, clear, deliberate, and restrained. Heaven did not send them to rule the earth, nor to shape it according to their will. Their purpose was simpler and far more dangerous to ignore. They were to observe, to guard, and to report. Nothing more, nothing less. In the ancient worldview preserved in Enoch's writings, the Watchers were positioned as sentinels along the boundary between heaven and earth. They stood close enough to see humanity clearly, yet distant enough to remain untouched by it. This distance was not cruelty. It was protection for humans and for the angels themselves. To watch without interfering was not a passive task. The Watchers were charged with maintaining order, ensuring that the natural boundaries set at creation were honored. Heaven had already established a delicate balance. Humans would live, grow, choose, and fail within their mortal frame. Angels would remain eternal servants, executing God's will without personal desire. The Watchers existed at the fault line of that design. They were witnesses to human progress and human weakness, recording what unfolded on earth while resisting the temptation to intervene. Their obedience upheld the architecture of creation itself. For generations, they fulfilled this role faithfully. They watched cities rise and families form. They saw humans learn to cultivate the land, develop language, and establish customs. They observed suffering and joy in equal measure. And yet they were forbidden from offering solutions. They were not allowed to teach advanced knowledge, alter human destiny, or shape the future beyond what had already been ordained. This limitation was intentional. Knowledge in the wrong hands or at the wrong time could destroy what it was meant to elevate. The command to observe without interference echoes a principle that appears again and again throughout Scripture. Power must be restrained. Heaven understood something profound about humanity, that growth forced too quickly becomes corruption, and wisdom received prematurely becomes a weapon. The Watchers were entrusted with insight beyond human comprehension, yet they were commanded to keep that knowledge sealed. Their restraint was an act of mercy, but restraint requires humility. And humility over time can erode under the weight of curiosity. As centuries passed, the Watchers did not simply see humanity, they began to understand it. They noticed how humans adapted, how they created meaning from pain, how they formed bonds that transcended survival. Mortality, once a weakness, began to appear powerful. Humans loved with intensity because their time was limited. They built legacies because they knew they would not last forever. To beings who existed outside of time, this urgency was both foreign and intoxicating. The Watchers began asking questions that edged dangerously close to disobedience. Why were humans allowed to experience life so fully, while angels remained bound to duty? Why were mortals permitted to shape history through choice, while eternal beings could only observe? These questions were subtle, but they carried weight. Observation had begun to feel like exclusion. Still, the command remained unchanged: do not interfere. Interference would mean crossing a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. It would mean collapsing the separation between the spiritual and the physical, between the eternal and the temporary. Heaven had drawn this line for a reason. Once crossed, it could not be redrawn without consequence. Enoch's account suggests that the Watchers were fully aware of this risk. Their knowledge made them accountable. They were not deceived. They were not ignorant. They knew the rules, the limits, and the cost of breaking them. This is what makes their eventual choice so significant. Their fall was not an accident, it was a decision. For a long time, nothing outward changed. Humanity remained unaware that celestial beings were watching from above. The world continued its slow march forward. But within the Watchers themselves, a tension was building. The longer they observed without acting, the more the boundary felt artificial. What if intervention could improve humanity's fate? What if their knowledge could prevent suffering? What if heaven's restraint was unnecessary? These were the justifications that quietly took shape. And when restraint becomes negotiable, obedience soon follows. The mission from heaven had been clear: watch, guard, report. Do not touch, do not teach, do not descend. The Watchers stood at the threshold of choice, torn between duty and desire. And soon observation would no longer be enough. Because once the line between heaven and earth is questioned, it is only a matter of time before someone steps across it. And that moment was drawing closer. The descent did not happen in chaos. It did not come with thunder from heaven or fire falling from the sky. According to the ancient account, it happened with intention, agreement, and a vow that would bind its participants together in judgment. The Watchers did not fall alone, and they did not fall by accident. They chose a place, a time, and a mountain where heaven and earth seemed close enough to touch. That place was Mount Hermon. Rising in the northern region of the ancient world, Mount Hermon stood as a boundary marker, geographical, spiritual, and symbolic. Snow-capped and imposing, it was a place associated with the divine long before Enoch's writings were recorded. High places were often believed to be gateways between realms, points where the distance between heaven and earth narrowed. For the Watchers, Mount Hermon was not just a location, it was a threshold. Here the Watchers gathered. They did not come as individuals wrestling with private temptation. They came as a collective fully aware of what they were about to do. Enoch tells us that their leader, Semjaza, feared that if only a few descended, the rest would retreat, leaving those who fell to bear the consequences alone. His solution was a pact, an oath that would ensure none could claim innocence once the boundary was crossed. 200 watchers stood together on Mount Hermon. They raised their voices not in worship but in agreement. They swore an oath. This oath was not a simple promise. In the ancient worldview, an oath carried spiritual weight. To swear together was to bind oneself to a shared fate. If one fell, all would fall. If judgment came, it would come upon them as one body. This was the moment rebellion became irreversible. The mountain itself would be marked by this act. Enoch records that its name became associated with the oath Hermon, derived from a word meaning to bind or to devote under a curse. From that point forward, Mount Hermon was remembered not only as a high place but as a place of transgression. With the oath sealed, the descent began. The watchers left their appointed stations. They crossed the boundary that had been set since creation. They moved from observers to participants, from guardians to violators of order. This was not merely a change in location, it was a collapse of categories. Eternal beings stepped into a mortal realm, carrying knowledge and power never meant to exist there, and the world did not resist them. Humanity was unprepared for what descended from above. The Watchers did not arrive as conquerors. They did not announce themselves as enemies. They came quietly, blending into the world they had watched for generations. To humans, they appeared as beings of great presence, an authority wise and luminous, unlike anything the world had known. What followed was not immediate destruction but influence. The Watchers took human wives, violating the boundary that separated heaven and earth. This act alone represented a fundamental breach of creation's design. Life was now being shaped by a union that was never intended to exist. And from this union, consequences would soon emerge, consequences that could not be undone. But the descent did not stop with relationships. Once on Earth, the Watchers began to act. They taught what had been forbidden. They shared knowledge that humanity was not ready to wield. They revealed secrets of metallurgy, warfare, enchantments, and the movements of the heavens. Each revelation chipped away at the natural progression of human development, accelerating it beyond safe limits. What was meant to be watched was now being rewritten. Heaven remained silent for a time. This silence was not approval. It was patience, a final allowance for choice to reveal its full consequences. The Watchers believed they had escaped notice, that their oath had secured them against retreat but not against judgment. They were mistaken. Every step of their descent was seen. Every secret taught was recorded. Mount Hermon stood as a witness to their decision. It was here that obedience ended and rebellion began. Not in open war, but in a vow made in confidence, spoken among angels who believed they could redefine their purpose. The descent to earth was complete, and with it the stage was set for a corruption so deep that the world itself would soon groan under its weight. Because once heaven's boundary is broken, it is not only angels who fall, the earth falls with them. The descent to earth did not immediately unleash chaos. There was no instant collapse of civilization, no sudden cry from heaven. Instead, corruption entered quietly through something far more subtle than violence or power. It began with sight. According to the ancient account, the Watchers saw the daughters of men, and what they saw awakened a desire they were never meant to carry. This moment is described with striking simplicity. They saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. The words themselves seem harmless, almost ordinary, but within that simplicity lies the turning point of the story. The Watchers were not designed to experience attraction as humans do. They were created without the biological urgency, the emotional volatility, and the temporal fear that shapes human desire. Yet now, dwelling among mortals, something within them shifted. What they felt was not merely curiosity. It was longing. The beauty of humanity was not only physical, it was layered with vulnerability, warmth, and impermanence. Humans aged. They laughed. They suffered loss. They formed bonds, knowing those bonds could be broken by time. To eternal beings, this fragility appeared powerful. The Watchers had observed humanity for generations, but observation from a distance had shielded them. Now that distance was gone. Desire grows fastest when boundaries disappear. The Watchers began to justify what they felt. They reasoned among themselves that attraction was not evil, that closeness could lead to understanding, that perhaps heaven's restrictions were unnecessarily harsh. These were not the arguments of monsters, but of beings convincing themselves that disobedience could be reframed as compassion. In their minds, desire became curiosity, and curiosity became entitlement. The line between heaven and earth blurred further. Enoch's account does not portray the Watchers as suddenly violent or cruel. Their corruption was gradual, rooted in self-deception. They believed that because they had always watched humanity, they understood it better than heaven did. And because they believed they understood, they assumed they had the right to act. This is the danger of forbidden desire. It rarely announces itself as rebellion. It presents itself as empathy, as connection, as something deserved. The Watchers did not say, "Let us destroy." They said, "Let us take." And taking, when it crosses divine boundaries, always carries consequences. When the Watchers took human wives, the act itself shattered the design of creation. It was not simply a violation of law, but of order. Heaven and earth were never meant to merge in this way. The separation between the eternal and the mortal existed to preserve both. By crossing it, the Watchers introduced instability into the very fabric of the world. This was not love as humanity understands it. It was possession. Desire driven by power, by imbalance, by the inability to accept limitation. Humans could not refuse beings who appeared superior in wisdom and presence. The choice was never equal, and this imbalance would soon bear fruit. Heaven remained silent, but the silence grew heavy. The Watchers believed their actions were hidden, but nothing escapes divine awareness. Every boundary crossed was recorded. Every justification was heard. Desire had led them from watching to taking, and from taking to teaching. The forbidden union was only the beginning. Once desire is indulged, restraint becomes meaningless. From these unions would come offspring unlike anything the world had seen. But even before their birth, the damage was already done. Humanity's place in creation had been altered. Knowledge would soon be introduced that accelerated violence, ambition, and corruption beyond natural limits. The Watchers had not only desired humanity, they had redefined it. Skivrium and the Skivrium. Skivrium, this is why the ancient text treats this moment as a point of no return. The fall of the Watchers was not sealed on Mount Hermon alone, it was sealed when desire overcame obedience. When eternal beings allowed themselves to want what was forbidden, the balance of the world shifted, and the consequences would not be confined to them. Because forbidden desire never affects only the one who indulges it. It spreads, it reshapes, it multiplies. What the Watchers saw in the daughters of men awakened a chain of events that would soon fill the earth with violence, distortion, and fear. The world had not yet realized what had been unleashed, but heaven had. Looting Staverbody, and judgment, though delayed, was already moving closer. Desire alone did not seal the fate of the Watchers. Desire can still be resisted. Temptation can still be reversed. What made their fall permanent was a decision that followed a pact that removed the possibility of turning back. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers understood that what they were doing could not remain a private failure. If only a few crossed the boundary, they would face judgment alone. And so they chose unity in rebellion, believing that shared guilt would lessen the cost. 200 Watchers gathered again, bound not by duty this time, but by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of isolation, fear of being the only ones to fall. Semjaza spoke for them. He knew the weight of what had already begun, and he feared hesitation more than punishment. If some withdrew now, the rest would bear the full consequence. So he proposed an oath, an agreement that none would retreat, none would claim innocence, none would stand apart when judgment came. It was not courage that drove this moment. It was desperation. They swore together. This was not a casual promise. In the ancient understanding, an oath invoked consequences beyond words. To swear together was to bind one's future to the fate of others. The Watchers pledged themselves to a shared outcome, knowing full well that the outcome could only be ruin. In doing so, they transformed individual disobedience into collective rebellion. No one turned back. That detail matters. Enoch emphasizes it for a reason. At this moment, retreat was still possible. Silence from heaven had not yet broken. Judgment had not yet fallen. But the Watchers chose certainty over repentance. They believed unity would protect them, that heaven would hesitate to punish so many at once. History has shown this belief to be a fatal miscalculation. The pact did something else as well. It removed personal accountability. When guilt is shared, responsibility feels lighter. When everyone is wrong, no one feels alone. The Watchers convinced themselves that rebellion carried less weight when it was communal. But heaven does not measure sin by numbers. It measures it by intent. With the oath sealed, the Watchers crossed a threshold from which there was no return. What began as curiosity had become commitment. What began as desire had become defiance. The boundary between heaven and earth was not merely crossed, it was dismissed. From this point forward, their actions accelerated. Teaching replaced restraint. Influence replaced observation. The Watchers began to shape the world they were once meant only to witness. Knowledge was no longer guarded. Secrets were no longer withheld. Humanity would soon feel the impact of this shift, though few would understand its source. The pact also revealed something deeply human about the Watchers. Despite their power and longevity, they mirrored humanity's oldest pattern. When faced with guilt, they sought solidarity instead of repentance. The irony is unmistakable. Angels tasked with guarding order adopted the very behavior they were meant to watch from afar. Heaven did not intervene immediately. This delay has troubled readers for centuries. Why allow rebellion to unfold? Why permit the Watchers to bind themselves together? The ancient worldview offers a sobering answer. Choices must be allowed to reach their full expression before judgment can be rendered. Half-formed rebellion reveals nothing. Completed defiance exposes everything. By swearing the pact, the Watchers revealed their true allegiance, not to heaven's order but to their own will. The world beneath them remained unaware. Humans did not hear the oath spoken on the mountain. They did not see the moment obedience died, but the effects of that moment would soon spread across the earth. The Watchers had locked themselves into a path that could end only one way. Judgment was no longer hypothetical. It was inevitable. The Pact of Rebellion ensured that when heaven finally acted, there would be no confusion about guilt, no room for denial, no claim of ignorance. 200 Watchers stood united not in service but in defiance. And in that unity, they guaranteed that the consequences would be as collective as the oath they swore. They believed the pact made them strong. In truth, it sealed their fall. The consequences of the pact did not remain hidden for long. When the Watchers crossed the final boundary and took human wives, something unprecedented entered the world. The union between heaven and earth produced offspring unlike anything humanity had ever known. According to the Book of Enoch, these children were called the Nephilim beings, whose very existence testified that the natural order had been violated. The ancient texts describe them as giants not merely in physical size but in presence and influence. They grew rapidly, far beyond human limits. What would take a human years to learn, they seemed to grasp instinctively. Strength, intelligence, and authority came to them with terrifying ease. To the people of the earth, they appeared unstoppable, towering figures who inspired awe at first and fear soon after. At the beginning, the Nephilim were celebrated. Humans admired them, served them, and elevated them as leaders and champions. In a world where survival was uncertain, power was persuasive. The giants promised protection, dominance, and advancement. They embodied the Watchers' belief that intervention could improve humanity's condition. But improvement quickly turned into exploitation. The Nephilim's hunger grew as fast as their bodies. Enoch records that they consumed the labor of mankind until humans could no longer sustain them. When food ran short, the giants did not restrain themselves. They took what they wanted. Crops were seized. Livestock was devoured. Eventually, violence replaced cooperation. What began as guardianship became domination, and then the bloodshed began. The giants turned against humanity and against one another. Their strength had no moral anchor, no inherited restraint. They crushed resistance effortlessly. Cities became battlegrounds. Fear replaced order. According to the ancient account, the earth itself cried out under the weight of the violence inflicted upon it. The corruption did not stop with physical destruction. The Watchers continued to teach forbidden knowledge, and the Nephilim amplified it. Weapons of war were refined. Strategies of conquest were perfected. Humanity learned how to kill more efficiently, how to deceive more convincingly, how to manipulate the unseen through practices they did not understand. What should have taken centuries of slow development was forced upon the world in a single generation. This acceleration was catastrophic. Enoch's description is clear. The Nephilim were not simply large humans. They represented a distortion of creation itself. Their existence blurred categories that were meant to remain separate. Mortal and immortal, spiritual and physical, had been fused in a way that produced instability rather than harmony. As the giants multiplied, so did the violence. The land became saturated with blood. Human suffering reached a scale that could no longer be dismissed as individual failure. The corruption was systemic, embedded into the fabric of society. Even the animals were affected, driven into chaos by the imbalance that now ruled the earth. Heaven could no longer remain silent. The cries of humanity reached beyond the earth. According to Enoch, the archangels themselves brought the report before the throne of God. They spoke of the destruction, the lawlessness, and the perversion introduced by the Watchers and their offspring. The Nephilim were not merely oppressing mankind, they were erasing it. This moment marks a shift in the narrative. Until now, the story has been about rebellion and consequence. Here, it becomes about survival. Humanity stood on the brink of extinction, not because of natural disaster, but because heaven's order had been violated. The Watchers had believed their actions would elevate humanity. Instead, they had created beings that consumed it. The Nephilim embodied the lie at the heart of rebellion, that power without restraint leads to progress. In reality, it leads only to domination and collapse. The giants would not last forever, but their impact would echo far beyond their lifespan. Their violence set in motion events that could not be undone by simple correction. The world was no longer merely flawed, it was infected. This is why the flood, when it finally came, was not described as punishment alone. It was intervention. The birth of the Nephilim forced heaven to act not out of anger but out of necessity. The balance of creation had been shattered, and the earth itself was paying the price. The giants stood as living evidence of that broken balance, and their existence made one truth unavoidable: the Watchers' rebellion had gone too far. The birth of the Nephilim marked a turning point, but what followed revealed the full scale of the damage. Violence did not appear suddenly. It spread steadily and relentlessly until it became the language of the world. According to the ancient account preserved by Enoch, the earth was no longer simply flawed or struggling. It was overwhelmed. Order collapsed under the weight of unchecked power, and fear became the common experience of humanity. At first, the giants ruled openly. Their strength allowed them to take whatever they wanted, and people obeyed because resistance was futile. Communities that once cooperated now competed for survival. Resources were seized rather than shared. Justice was replaced by force. The Nephilim were no longer protectors or leaders. They were masters, and the world beneath them bent under their demands. As scarcity increased, restraint disappeared. Enoch describes a grim progression. When human labor could no longer sustain the giants, they turned on what remained. Animals were consumed without limit. Fields were stripped bare. And when even that was not enough, the violence turned inward. Humanity itself became a target. The text does not dwell on graphic detail, but its meaning is clear. The boundaries that protect life were gone. This was not chaos born of desperation alone. It was corruption born of influence. The Watchers had introduced knowledge without wisdom, power without accountability. Humanity learned to dominate rather than cultivate, to conquer rather than coexist. Violence became normalized not as an act of survival, but as a means of control. Bloodshed spread across the land. Cities that once represented stability became centers of fear. Families fractured, trust vanished. The earth itself, according to the ancient worldview, responded to this corruption. Creation was never meant to function under such imbalance. When violence becomes systemic, it affects more than human society. It distorts the environment that sustains it. Even nature reflected the disorder. Animals behaved unpredictably. Ecosystems broke down. The harmony established at creation was unraveling thread by thread. What had begun with a forbidden decision on a mountain had now reached every corner of the world. The Watchers could no longer claim ignorance. They had not only witnessed the corruption, they had enabled it. Their teachings armed humanity with tools it was not ready to wield. Their offspring embodied unchecked dominance. And yet the rebellion continued. The Watchers did not step in to undo the damage. Instead, they watched the world descend into the very chaos they were appointed to prevent. This is one of the most sobering elements of Enoch's account. The Watchers did not fall because they hated humanity. They fell because they believed they could improve it. Their failure reveals a hard truth: good intentions cannot override divine boundaries. When power is introduced without restraint, even noble goals can produce devastation. The violence reached a point where it could no longer be localized or contained. According to Enoch, the earth was filled with it, a phrase that suggests total saturation. There was no refuge untouched by the consequences of rebellion. Innocence became rare. Survival required compromise. The world was being reshaped into something unrecognizable, and heaven was watching. The cries of humanity did not go unheard. In the ancient narrative, the suffering of the world rose like a testimony against those responsible. The bloodshed was not just a human tragedy, it was evidence of a cosmic failure. The Watchers had abandoned their role, and the earth was paying the price. This moment reframes the coming judgment. What followed was not a sudden reaction or an emotional outburst from heaven. It was a response to a world that had crossed a point of no return. The corruption was no longer individual, it was global. And global corruption requires decisive intervention. The flood, when it came, would not be random. It would not be excessive. It would be targeted at a problem that could no longer be corrected by gradual means. The violence, the bloodshed, and the collapse of order made one thing clear: the experiment had failed. The Watchers' rebellion had proven that boundaries exist for a reason. Without them, power consumes everything in its path. The world before the flood stands as a warning preserved in ancient memory, a reminder that corruption does not begin with destruction, but with the quiet dismissal of restraint. And by the time heaven prepared to act, the earth was already crying out for relief. The Watchers did not only descend to earth with desire in their hearts. They came carrying knowledge that humanity was never meant to touch secrets powerful enough to reshape civilization before it was ready. What began as quiet instruction soon became a turning point in human history, a moment when innocence was traded for power. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers began teaching humans things that were hidden in heaven. They revealed how to forge weapons from metal swords, knives, shields, tools, designed not to protect life, but to take it. Before this conflict existed, but now, violence evolved. War became organized. Bloodshed became efficient. Humanity learned not just how to fight, but how to dominate. Others taught the secrets of enchantments and spells. Words were no longer just communication. They became tools to manipulate reality. Charms were whispered, symbols were drawn. People sought control over forces they did not understand. Believing power itself was wisdom. But power without restraint is never neutral. It bends the heart before it bends the world. Some Watchers revealed the paths of the stars, astronomy mixed with forbidden astrology. Humans were taught to read signs in the heavens, to seek destiny in constellations, to predict events written not by God but by interpretation. What was once wonder turned into obsession. People no longer trusted the Creator. They trusted omens. One of the most unsettling teachings was the knowledge of beautification and appearance. Cosmetics, adornments, and methods to alter the body were introduced not as art but as deception. Desire became a commodity. Attraction became manipulation. Humanity learned how to hide truth behind appearance, how to seduce without love, how to distract without meaning. It was not beauty that corrupted the world, it was intention. Another Watcher revealed the secrets of metallurgy beyond weapons, how to extract precious metals, how to shape them, how to hoard them. Wealth concentrated, greed followed. Power shifted away from community and toward domination. The earth itself began to suffer as humans tore into it without reverence, driven by hunger for more. With knowledge came hierarchy. With hierarchy came oppression. The Nephilim, already giants in strength, now ruled with superior intelligence and tools. Ordinary humans were no longer equals. They were resources. Violence increased not because humans were evil, but because they were overwhelmed by knowledge they could not morally contain. This was the true corruption of the world. Not ignorance, but premature enlightenment. The Watchers did not create sin, but they accelerated it. They removed the natural boundaries that protected humanity from itself. Like giving fire to a child without teaching restraint, the result was inevitable. Enoch describes the earth crying out. Creation itself could not bear the weight of what humanity had become. Animals were hunted without balance. Humans turned on each other. Blood stained the ground so deeply that it seemed to speak. Heaven watched in silence until silence was no longer possible. What makes this moment so terrifying is its familiarity. Knowledge promised progress, power promised freedom, and yet everything moved closer to collapse. The Watchers may have believed they were enlightening humanity, but in truth they were unraveling it. This was not just ancient history, it was a pattern. A warning written in the language of myth but aimed directly at the human heart. When knowledge outruns wisdom, destruction follows. When power replaces obedience, chaos is inevitable. And heaven was watching. The forbidden knowledge had been released. The line had been crossed, and now judgment was no longer a question of if, but when. The world could no longer remain silent. Violence had reached a point where it was no longer hidden in shadows, it ruled openly. The Nephilim dominated the land, consuming everything in their path. Humanity, once created to steward the earth, had become enslaved by the consequences of forbidden knowledge, and the earth itself began to cry out. According to the Book of Enoch, this was not poetic language. The ground soaked in blood bore witness against its own inhabitants. Creation designed for harmony was forced to endure chaos. Every act of violence echoed upward, rising beyond the clouds, reaching the threshold of heaven. The cries were not only human. Animals suffered. The balance of nature collapsed. What had been entrusted to mankind was devoured by unchecked power. The Nephilim demanded more food, more dominance, more blood. When the earth could no longer sustain them, they turned on humanity itself. Brother turned against brother. Survival replaced mercy. At this moment, the heavens could no longer remain distant observers. Enoch describes the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, lifting their voices before the Most High. They did not speak casually. They testified. They presented evidence of corruption of watchers who abandoned their station of humanity, crushed beneath a burden it was never meant to carry. Heaven listened. This was not ignorance. God was not unaware. But divine justice does not act in haste. Judgment comes only after truth is fully revealed, and now the truth was undeniable. The Watchers had crossed an irreversible line. They had sworn an oath on Mount Hermon, binding themselves together in rebellion. They had taught forbidden knowledge. They had defiled the order of creation, and their offspring had filled the earth with terror. Heaven's response was not immediate destruction. It was separation. God commanded Raphael to bind Azazel, one of the chief corruptors, and cast him into darkness. He was to be covered in jagged stones, cut off from both heaven and earth. Knowledge that had been misused would no longer flow freely. Boundaries were being restored. Gabriel was sent to stir conflict among the Nephilim, not to save them, but to end them. The giants born of violence would now consume each other. Their strength would become their downfall. Their extinction would not come by human hands alone, but by divine decree. Michael was commanded to confront the Watchers themselves. They would witness the destruction of their sons. They would see the consequences of their rebellion before being bound and imprisoned, awaiting final judgment. Their punishment was not just physical, it was eternal awareness of their failure. But what of humanity? Heaven's response included mercy. Though corrupted humans were not the original rebels, they were deceived, overwhelmed, and manipulated. Yet mercy did not mean escape from consequence. The earth had to be cleansed. Violence had to be reset. A line had to be drawn between the world that was and the world that could be. This was the beginning of a divine intervention that would culminate in the flood. Not as an act of rage, but of restoration. A reset of creation itself. Enoch stood at the center of this moment, not as a warrior, but as a witness. He was chosen to deliver a message the Watchers never expected. There would be no forgiveness for them. Their time had passed. Their fate was sealed. The heavens had spoken. The earth had been heard. And the countdown to judgment had begun. Enoch was not a king. He was not a warrior. He commanded no armies and ruled no nations. Yet among all the humans alive during that age of chaos, he alone was chosen to stand between heaven and earth. In a world dominated by giants and corrupted by forbidden knowledge, Enoch walked a different path. Scripture describes him simply Enoch, walked with God. But the Book of Enoch expands this phrase into something far more profound. It was not metaphor, it was movement. Enoch was taken beyond the limits of human sight, shown realms no mortal was meant to see, and entrusted with a message no human would dare to deliver. As violence consumed the earth and the Watchers awaited judgment, heaven required a messenger who was untouched by rebellion. Enoch was that man, not because he was perfect, but because he was faithful. He listened when others demanded power. He obeyed when others reached for forbidden knowledge. Enoch was summoned into the presence of the holy ones. He saw the structure of creation itself, the storehouses of wind and rain, the paths of the stars, the foundations of the earth. These visions were not given for curiosity. They were evidence, proof that order existed long before corruption and that order would be restored. Then came the task. Enoch was commanded to deliver judgment to the watchers. Not comfort, not negotiation. Judgment. The fallen ones, once radiant guardians, now trembled. For the first time, beings who had taught humans fear now experienced it themselves. They pleaded with Enoch to intercede on their behalf. They begged him to carry a petition to God, hoping for mercy. Ironically, they turned to a human, the very race they had corrupted, for help. Enoch listened, but he did not promise salvation. He took their words and ascended once more, standing before the divine throne. And there, the answer was given. There would be no forgiveness for the watchers. They had abandoned heaven willingly. They had crossed boundaries knowingly. Their judgment was final. When Enoch returned with the message, it shattered any remaining hope the watchers held. They would be bound, imprisoned, and removed from influence. Their offspring would perish. Their names would be erased from honor and remembered only as a warning. But Enoch's role did not end there. He was also shown what was coming for the world of humans. The flood was approaching not as sudden wrath, but as a measured response to unrestrained corruption. Humanity would face loss, but not annihilation. A remnant would remain. Life would continue, cleansed and reordered. Enoch carried this knowledge in silence. He was not sent to preach publicly or gather followers. His mission was not popularity, it was preservation of truth. His writings would outlive his generation, waiting for a future audience prepared to hear them. Unlike others, Enoch did not die. According to ancient tradition, he was taken, removed from the earth before judgment fell. A living testimony that intimacy with God could lift a human beyond the reach of corruption. This is why Enoch matters. He stands as proof that even in the darkest age, alignment with heaven was possible, that obedience still had power, that knowledge, when given by God rather than stolen, led not to destruction but to transformation. Enoch was the bridge between rebellion and judgment, between heaven and earth, between what was forbidden and what was revealed. And through him, the final phase of the ancient story was about to unfold. The flood did not begin with rain. It began with a decision. Long before the first drop fell from the sky, heaven had already spoken. The corruption of the world had reached a point of no return. The watchers were bound. The Nephilim were marked for destruction. And humanity stood at the edge of a reset that would change history forever. According to the Book of Enoch, the flood was not merely punishment for human wrongdoing. It was a cleansing, targeted, deliberate, and necessary. Something unnatural had entered creation, and it could not be allowed to continue. The earth itself had become a battlefield between divine order and rebellion. Violence had rewritten the laws of survival. Mercy disappeared. Fear ruled. The giants devoured resources, then turned on those who served them. Knowledge meant to elevate humanity had become a weapon of domination. What began as corruption ended as extinction. Heaven responded not with chaos, but with control. The elements were prepared. The boundaries of the waters above and below were ready to be released. This was not mythic exaggeration. In Enoch's vision, the flood was a reversal of creation itself. The same waters, once separated to make space for life, would now be used to restore that space. But even in judgment, mercy remained. God revealed the plan to preserve life through one man, Noah. Not because he was powerful, but because he was obedient. Like Enoch, Noah walked differently. While the world celebrated strength and knowledge, Noah listened. While others mocked warnings of judgment, he prepared. The ark was not an escape vessel. It was a boundary, a dividing line between the corrupted world and the world to come. Everything inside would be preserved. Everything outside would be surrendered to the waters. Enoch understood the weight of this moment. He saw the flood not as destruction but as silence, a return to stillness after generations of noise, violence, and defiance. The earth would rest, blood would no longer cry out. The influence of the fallen would be cut off, yet one question lingered. What happens to the spirits of the Nephilim? Enoch reveals that while their bodies would perish, their spirits would remain disembodied, restless, unable to return to heaven. These spirits would wander the earth, influencing, deceiving, and oppressing. This, according to Enoch, is the origin of ongoing spiritual conflict in the world after the flood. The flood ended the age of giants, but not the memory of rebellion. When the waters finally rose, they did not discriminate. Mountains disappeared, cities vanished, the world returned to formlessness. And when the waters receded, nothing was the same. A new covenant would emerge. Boundaries would be reinforced. Heaven and earth would remain separate once more. But the warning endured. The flood proved that heaven will intervene when corruption crosses a line, that rebellion has consequences, and that even divine patience has limits. Enoch's message echoed beyond his lifetime. What happened once could happen again, not with water, but through judgment of another kind. A final reckoning foretold, but not yet fulfilled. The flood was not the end of the story. It was the reset. And from the silence left behind, a new chapter of human history began, one still shaped by the shadows of an ancient rebellion. When the waters finally receded, the world stood silent. Mountains re-emerged. The sky cleared. Life stepped cautiously back onto dry ground. To many, the flood appeared to be the end of evil, a divine reset that washed away corruption forever. But the Book of Enoch offers a more unsettling truth. Evil did not end. It changed form. The giants were gone. Their bodies had perished beneath the waters. The watchers were bound, imprisoned, removed from the earth. On the surface, the rebellion was over. Order seemed restored. Yet beneath this apparent peace, something remained, something unseen. Enoch reveals that the spirits of the Nephilim did not die with their bodies. These beings, born from a union never meant to exist, could not return to heaven, nor could they remain in the earth as flesh. They became wanderers, disembodied entities roaming the world they once ruled. Their influence did not require physical strength. It required deception. This is why the post-flood world was not free from conflict. Humanity began again, but weakness remained. Fear returned. Power still tempted. Though knowledge of weapons and warfare was reduced, the desire for dominance survived. The battlefield shifted from physical giants to internal struggle. Influence replaced force. The Book of Enoch describes these wandering spirits as sources of unrest, oppression, and moral distortion. They whisper. They exploit fear. They feed on chaos. While the flood erased open rebellion, it did not erase the consequences of ancient transgression. This explains something the flood narrative alone cannot. Why does violence reappear so quickly in human history? Why does corruption resurface generation after generation, even after divine intervention? Because the war did not end, it went underground. God reinforced boundaries. Covenants were established, laws would be given, prophets would rise. Humanity was no longer abandoned to chaos, but the responsibility to choose righteousness became heavier. Evil no longer ruled openly. It tested quietly. Enoch understood this future. His visions extended beyond the flood, beyond Noah, beyond early civilizations. He saw cycles of obedience and rebellion repeating. Each time humanity drifted too far, divine correction followed, not always through destruction, but through warning. This is why Enoch's writings focus so heavily on judgment in the last days. The flood was not the final act. It was a preview. The same forces that once corrupted the ancient world would attempt to rise again. Not through giants, but through systems. Not through open rebellion, but through gradual compromise. The Watchers would not return, but their influence would echo. Yet Enoch's message was not one of despair. Alongside warnings, he saw hope. He saw righteous ones preserved. He saw justice restored. He saw a time when corruption would be permanently removed, not reset, but ended. The flood proved that heaven acts. The aftermath proved that humanity must choose. Evil did not vanish with the waters. It retreated, waiting for moments of weakness. And that reality makes Enoch's story far more relevant than ancient history. It is a mirror. The flood asks a haunting question, one that still echoes today. If corruption once again fills the earth, if boundaries are crossed once more, will humanity recognize the warning signs this time? Or will history repeat itself? Among all the visions given to Enoch, none are more startling than the revelation of a figure he calls the Son of Man. This is the moment where the Book of Enoch steps beyond ancient myth, and enters territory that would later define Christian belief long before the Gospels were written. Enoch describes this figure not as a mere messenger, but as a divine agent of judgment and restoration. He is pre-existent, chosen before creation itself. He stands beside the Most High, sharing authority, executing justice, and revealing truth. This description alone raises a question that has troubled scholars for centuries. How could such a figure appear in a text that predates the New Testament? According to Enoch, the Son of Man is revealed in the heavenly realm before being made known on earth. He is hidden from humanity until the appointed time. Kings, rulers, and the powerful of the world do not recognize him, yet he sees them all. Nothing is concealed from his presence. This figure is not passive. He judges the watchers. He condemns the corrupt. He vindicates the righteous. In Enoch's vision, the Son of Man sits upon a throne of glory. The fate of the fallen is sealed in his presence. The unjust are stripped of power. The humble are elevated. The imbalance created by rebellion is corrected not gradually, but decisively. What makes this prophecy dangerous is not its symbolism, but its clarity. The Son of Man is not an abstract idea. He is personal. He speaks, he acts, he rules. Centuries later, this exact title, Son of Man, would be used repeatedly by Jesus of Nazareth to describe himself. Not once or twice, but more than any other title. For early readers familiar with Enoch, the implication would have been unmistakable. Jesus was not inventing a phrase. He was claiming a role. This connection explains why the Book of Enoch became controversial. Its prophecies aligned too closely with Christian theology while remaining outside the accepted Hebrew canon. It provided language, imagery, and authority that challenged existing religious boundaries. If Enoch's Son of Man was legitimate, then divine revelation extended beyond officially sanctioned texts. That idea alone was destabilizing. Enoch's vision also describes a final gathering. The righteous from all generations are brought together. The Son of Man becomes their light, their protector, their king. In contrast, those who exploited power and corrupted truth face irreversible judgment. This is not revenge, it is restoration. The prophecy reveals that evil does not simply fade away. It is confronted, exposed, removed. The same rebellion that began with the Watchers ends before the throne of the Son of Man. What makes this vision even more unsettling is its timing. Enoch does not place it in his own era. He sees it in the last days. A future moment when corruption reaches its peak once again, when hidden forces rise, when humanity stands at another threshold. The flood was a warning. The Son of Man is the conclusion. This prophecy reframes history as a long arc moving toward justice. Not random events, but intentional steps toward restoration. Enoch saw the beginning of rebellion, and he saw its end. Which leaves one final question. If Enoch spoke the truth, why was his book removed? So why was the Book of Enoch removed from the Bible? This question has haunted theologians, historians, and readers for centuries. The answer is not simple, and it is not singular. The removal of Enoch was not the result of one decision, but of many pressures converging over time. First, it is important to understand that the Book of Enoch was never universally rejected. In fact, early Jewish communities knew it well. Fragments were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming that it circulated widely long before Christianity emerged. Early Christians also read it. The New Testament book of Jude even quotes Enoch directly word for word. So exclusion did not come from ignorance. It came from discomfort. Enoch presents a worldview that is expansive, unsettling, and difficult to contain. It speaks openly about angels rebelling heavenly hierarchies, cosmic judgment, and pre-existent divine figures. These ideas complicated attempts to define clean theological boundaries. As religious institutions formed, clarity became survival. Canonization required limits. One major issue was authorship. While tradition attributes the book to Enoch, scholars recognized it as a composite work written over centuries by different authors. This raised questions of authority. Which parts were original, which were later expansions? Uncertainty made leaders cautious. But many biblical books faced similar questions and remained included. So authorship alone does not explain removal. Another concern was theology. Enoch expands the role of angels dramatically. The Watchers are not symbolic. They are active agents, shaping human history. Their rebellion introduces a supernatural explanation for evil. that shifts focus away from human responsibility alone. This complexity challenged simpler moral frameworks. More importantly, Enoch's prophecy of the Son of Man was too specific. It described a divine figure who existed before creation, judged the fallen, and ruled eternally. For early Jewish authorities, this blurred strict monotheistic lines. For later Christian leaders, it raised an uncomfortable question: why did a non-canonical book describe the Messiah so clearly? Enoch did not just support Christian theology, it predated it. That made it dangerous. There was also the issue of control. Canonized scripture defined acceptable belief. Enoch opened doors to cosmic warfare, hidden knowledge and unseen powers operating beyond institutional oversight. Once readers accepted Enoch, they might question what else had been omitted. Religious unity depends on shared boundaries. Enoch ignored boundaries. Over time, as church structures solidified, texts that created theological tension were set aside. Not destroyed, just excluded. Enoch survived in Ethiopian tradition, preserved quietly, while the wider world forgot, or was encouraged to forget. Yet exclusion does not equal falsehood. Many ancient writings were removed not because they were wrong, but because they were difficult. Enoch does not offer comfort. It offers exposure. It pulls back the veil and reveals a universe far more complex than most doctrines are prepared to explain. This is why Enoch still unsettles readers today. It suggests that evil has a history, that judgment has stages, that humanity exists within a larger cosmic conflict, and that divine justice is both patient and inevitable. Perhaps the real question is not why Enoch was removed, but why it was preserved at all. Maybe it was never meant for every generation. Maybe it was written for a time when humanity would once again sense that something unseen is moving beneath the surface of history. A time when ancient warnings would feel uncomfortably relevant. And that leads to the final page. Because the Book of Enoch does not end with answers. It ends with a warning. The Book of Enoch does not end with closure. It ends with tension. There is no final victory scene, no peaceful resolution, no moment where all mysteries are neatly explained. Instead, the book fades into silence, leaving behind questions that refuse to rest. Enoch's final message is not comfort, it is awareness. Heaven is watching. The fallen are waiting. And the story of Genesis is far deeper than we were ever taught to imagine. Enoch saw the beginning of rebellion and the shape of its end. He witnessed the rise of the Watchers, the corruption of the world, the cleansing flood, and the promise of ultimate judgment. Yet even with all he was shown, one truth remained constant. History is moving toward a conclusion that has not yet arrived. The flood was not the final act. It was a warning. The binding of the Watchers was not the end of rebellion. It was containment. The removal of Enoch's book from the canon was not erasure. It was delay. According to Enoch, the forces that once disrupted creation have not vanished. They are restrained, limited, watched, waiting for moments when humanity forgets its boundaries, when power replaces humility, and when knowledge is pursued without wisdom. This is what makes Enoch unsettling. It refuses to stay in the past. Its themes echo forward into every generation that wrestles with violence, control, and unseen influence. It suggests that history is not random, that patterns repeat, that warnings ignored once can return with greater consequences. Enoch leaves us with an uncomfortable responsibility. If corruption once reached a point that required divine intervention, what would the warning signs look like today? Would we recognize them, or would we dismiss them as myth, symbolism, or coincidence? The Book of Enoch does not demand belief. It demands reflection. It invites the reader to consider a universe where actions ripple beyond the visible, where choices matter not only on earth but in realms unseen, where justice is delayed, not denied. And perhaps this is why Enoch was never meant to be fully explained. Mystery has power. What is forbidden draws attention. What is hidden demands curiosity. What is unresolved lingers. Enoch walked with God and disappeared from history, leaving behind words that still disturb, still challenge, still whisper across centuries. His story reminds us that faith is not always certainty. Sometimes it is vigilance. Sometimes it is remembering that we are not alone. The heavens observe, the earth remembers, and the ancient warnings remain waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look beyond the surface of Scripture. So the question is no longer whether the Book of Enoch matters. The question is why its message feels more relevant now than ever before. And that question is yours to answer. What if the flood wasn't the end, but the pause? What if the watchers never truly left? Only silenced, Enoch warned us that heaven is watching and history repeats. So the real question isn't what happened back then, it's whether we're approaching that line again. If this story made you uneasy, you're not alone. These mysteries were never meant to be comfortable. Share your thoughts below. What do you think was truly hidden? And if you want to explore what comes next, stay with us.